session in the state of Texas. You can look at this as a glass half full or a glass half empty. I have a number of people that are very disturbed about some of the things that did not happen in this legislative session and should have, given the complexion of the individuals and the makeup of those individuals. But at the same time, a number of things were accomplished. And in particular, we want to look at some of the issues related to the focus that Texas Values had. What about those ban the Bible bills? What about the so-called Chick-fil-A bill? And I thought it would be really appropriate to do kind of an evaluation and analysis of what took place down there in Austin. So we, of course, welcome back to the microphone Jonathan Saenz, who is the president of Texas Values, an individual that in the past, of course, worked with Liberty Institute, but has a group of individuals that have been on the Capitol grounds for a long period of time and wanted to get some of his analysis. So, Jonathan, welcome back to Point of View.
Oh, it's great to be back with you.
One of the articles we've posted here is from your website, and I love how it's titled there because it really kind of takes us back to the recap of the legislative session and helps us understand that there were some that were absolutely convinced that the whole Chick-fil-A bill was going to die, which it did not. But let's start with the very first issues that you addressed. When we first had you on, we spent some time talking about some of these so-called ban the Bible bills. And we've said that in order to be successful in any legislative session, you have to not only get rid of and prevent bad bills from being passed. We also, in just a minute, will talk about a good bill that was passed. But tell us where we stand on some of those bills that were put forward by the LGBTQ caucus.
Well, you're talking about the title of our session wrap-up, which is "They Thought It Was Dead," and people can find that at txvaluesaction.org. And legislative session plays out almost like a sitcom or your favorite show on TV for a particular season. Kind of begins with certain things happen in the middle, and then there's some type of conclusion. And so that's kind of the flavor, if you will, in the way that we styled our session wrap-up piece, because a lot of times people are, it is a lot about what passed and what didn't. But you have to have the proper context. You got to really allow people to see, where did you start, how did you get there, and what are some of the things that you had to navigate. And so that's what we've done. I think people really enjoy seeing our session wrap-up piece. As a matter of fact, you can see us talk about it live in some events around Texas. June 5th, we'll be in San Antonio. Later this week, June 11th, we'll be in Dallas. And in June 17th, we'll be in Fort Worth. And so you can see more about that at txvalues.org. But, look, the Save Chick-fil-A religious freedom bill did pass. There were two very significant pro-life bills that passed. The Chick-fil-A religious freedom bill, Senate Bill 1978. Also, the Born Alive for Protection Act, House Bill 16 was passed. And then Senate Bill 22 is a bill that passed that would cut off these sweetheart deals, these contracts with abortion providers, and subsidization, really, of those type of entities. And so those are the three things that we highlight. But, it did start with the ban the Bible bills, and that was a concern. These are bills that put sexual orientation, gender identity into our state law like never before, and really we don't have those things together in law at the state level, and there's a good reason why. They're typically used to punish people of faith, to use the government to punish people with criminal penalties. Yes, you could go to jail for having a view on sexual orientation, gender identity. Thankfully, those bills did not pass, and actually they didn't really make any less progress than they did last session, even though more of those bills were filed by LGBT and lesbian, gay, sexuality advocates. More of those bills were filed this session, but actually 2 years ago, they had fewer bills filed, but they went a little bit further. But election results kept one of those members from coming back that allowed those bills to move forward last time. So we were definitely encouraged by that. It was also the LGBT caucus that was new, and they felt like they were going to do a whole lot more. And they did kill the House version of the Chick-fil-A bill, religious freedom bill, on a technicality, but they really made their move too soon because there was still time left. And so the Senate version of that bill moves, and that's why with the name, they thought it was dead, because there was a lot of celebrating from their side and acting like the issue was over and it was done. Well, then there was a resurrection, if you will, in the Senate, a bill that was there that had not moved yet on the same issue. That bill moved, and it moved over to the House, and there wasn't really their ability to attack it was different this time. And that bill ended up getting passed, and we expect the governor to be signing it any day.
Well, and again, I might just point out, as you said, that we have a link to They Thought It Was Dead, and you can go to txvaluesaction.org, or, of course, you can just simply go to Point of View because we have the same article there and a link. And I think that's encouraging to know, because when I saw that it had been killed, I thought, well, maybe that's it. And then I began to see some of the material from you saying, wait a minute, we still have a chance of taking something in the Senate. And as you well know, there's sort of a deadline that if your bill is not heard in a certain amount of time, then it is dead. And so they were cooing. I, matter of fact, even saw one individual say, well, the wicked witch is dead. Nope, turns out the bill made it through. And I think it is a lesson, Jonathan, to really pass on to our listeners. Perseverance, tenacity are important. Sometimes you don't win on the first reading of a bill. Sometimes you don't win in the first legislative session. But if you push and continue to push and continue to be faithful, eventually you'll have success.
Well, look, I've been doing work at the Capitol since 2007, and there's no question. You really, the focus, and it's tied into our title, it's all about staying alive and really fighting it to the last moment. That's why we've got a member of 10 members of our team that are part of our efforts. Many of them were at the Capitol every day, all 140 days. And just as a reminder to listeners, people maybe hadn't heard about what happened, San Antonio City Council voted to ban Chick-fil-A from opening up a store at their airport because there was a report that Chick-fil-A gave donations to Christian ministries like Salvation Army and Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And so these aren't hypotheticals anymore. I mean, the city council voted, a majority of them voted to ban Chick-fil-A from opening up a store because of, really their Christian affiliation. So now we've got a Senate bill, a bill that's going to the governor's desk. It's going to be signed, we expect, that does not allow it. It prevents the government from punishing individuals and business owners because of donations that they give to Christian ministries or religious organizations, or if they're a part of a membership or they're affiliated with those organizations. And so we've seen this type of government action in other parts of the country. It now hit Texas. And the city council in San Antonio, they voted twice on this issue.
Yes.
And so the second vote was a little bit tighter, but twice they did after this bill was already moving. So it was very clear the only way to hold them accountable is to have a statewide law. And it's not just for Chick-fil-A. I mean, this impacts any business that could find themselves in this situation, many of them who probably don't have the market space like Chick-fil-A or the strength. And if they lose one location, that could be it for them. And so, and it certainly has impacted Chick-fil-A. I mean, when you lose a store, that there's no question that has an impact, but it could impact other businesses as well. But now we got a law in place we expect to be signed in Bill 1978 that prevents that.
We'll take a break, continue our conversation with Jonathan Saenz right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Are single-parent families just as good for children as two-parent families? Some of the headlines recently in newspapers and news magazines seem to say so. But all you have to do is look back at academic studies to see that, in nearly every case, two parents are better than one. One older family study deserves renewed attention. Dr. Patrick Fagan, using data from the National Survey of Children's Health, found two important factors. Children who grow up in an intact family and attend religious services do better than children who do not. There is a significant discrepancy between children who grew up in intact two-parent families and those who came from broken homes. They also found a similar discrepancy between those who attend religious services weekly and those who worship less frequently. They found that children in the former groups were 5 times less likely to repeat a grade, less likely to have behavior problems at home and school, and more likely to be cooperative and understanding of others' feelings. They also found that these differences held true even after controlling for family income and poverty, as well as for the parents' education level, race, and ethnicity. In essence, the study suggests that the best prescription for society is a stable family and family worship. In this environment, children thrive emotionally and achieve academically. In a sense, the study is a flip side of studies that were published years ago about the impact of divorce on children. In my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, I talk about the 3 E's of negative impact of divorce. That would be emotional impact, educational impact, and economic impact. So whether you look at these positive studies or the earlier negative studies, you can see the importance of family and worship. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jonathan Saenz with us, and again, president of Texas Values. We also have a link to Texas Values Action and this very good article that is a good summary that was put together that just kind of reminds us that in the 86th legislative session, many people thought the Chick-fil-A bill was dead, and it was not. It came back from the dead, a resurrection, and so we're going to talk about that. But, Jonathan, before we go any further, we will, of course, have you on next Monday, but you mentioned that on June 11th, which is a Tuesday, you'll be speaking in Dallas. I don't know how many of the people listening this hour would be in San Antonio, but I suspect there are a number of people listening right now that actually would be able to attend your event next Tuesday. And rather than wait till next Monday to announce that, why don't you give us some details about it right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be at the Maggiano's at North Central. I forget the exact location, but a little bit of the northwest side of the Dallas area, not too far from downtown, but right in between really Dallas County and Collin County. You can go to our Facebook page, Texas Values Facebook page, from 11:30 to 1. We're going to have a lunch at Maggiano's with a session wrap-up, an opportunity for people to find out in person. You can ask questions, find out some more details, the backstories, all the fun stuff, the interesting stuff that you want to hear about what happened during the session. And there's a lot to talk about with what happened over 140 days. I mean, we've got the next year and a half to talk about it, if you will, but let's not wait until then. Let's talk about it now. A lot of people want to know. And a lot of the new laws, they go into effect September 1. Some of them go into effect immediately, depending on the margin of passage. But there's a lot to discuss. So June 11th at Maggiano's in Dallas, it's pretty reasonable. I think it's $25 or $30. I forget the cost to attend. That's not a whole lot more than what you pay for lunch, but you're getting up-close experience with our team, myself. I will be there talking about these issues and giving some more detail. And rumor has it we might have one or two special guests. I can't announce those now, but just more reason for people to try to attend the event.
Well, let's talk about that for just a minute. We'll try to post this on our website, but if you go to the Facebook page, it has on June 11th, 11:30. It's at the Maggiano's at North Park. So those of you who know where the North Park Center is, that's all you need to know, 11:30 to 1. For anybody that's listening in Fort Worth, I know you have one on June 17th at Joe Garcia's. So those are some events in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you'd like to know a little bit more, we'll see if we can put up a link there to Texas Values at the Facebook page. And there's a place where you can get the tickets and indicate whether or not you're interested. And I think it's going to be a great opportunity. So that is one more announcement that we'll make today so that you can plan ahead. Of course, we'll talk about it next Monday when you're on, June 10th. But again, that's just the day before, and some people like to plan a little bit further ahead. So what about this? Are there some lessons that you are taking from this experience? You have been, as you said, in the state capitol for years, but every legislative session maybe provides another life lesson. What are some of the takeaways that you have from this legislative session that just finished?
Well, look, I want to say something specifically for your Dallas-Fort Worth listening audience about the membership that we worked with. Jeff Leach, the author of House Bill 16, the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, did fantastic work this session, not just on that bill, but other issues as well. He served as chairman of the Judiciary and Civil Jurisprudence. So it's great. I mean, look, Jeff and I go a long way back. I mean, we did work together at First Liberty Institute many years ago, and I knew him when he was a law student. And, what an honor to serve with him, to really assist him. He's the one in public service. And then Matt Krause as well, the author of the Save Chick-fil-A Religious Freedom Bill, did fantastic work, and other members too. I mean, there's so many people, Matt Shaheen, Jonathan Stickland, great Candy Noble in her freshman season, her freshman session, she passed Senate Bill 22. She's a House author of that pro-life bill. What a tremendous job by her and other members of the legislature as well that make up the Dallas-Fort Worth group of, a caucus, if you will, and group of members from up in that area and other parts of the state. But that was, really, I think that was something about this session, and it's not anything new particularly, but it's members that we've known for a while that are now in positions that they're leading these efforts as well. They're the author of some of these significant bills. They're chairs of committee. And so it's very encouraging for relationships like that have grown over time to really take even stronger steps forward and to work alongside them. I mean, you should have seen this diagram that we had for the Save Chick-fil-A bill, the Senate Bill 1978 Religious Freedom Bill that passed in Matt Krause's office. Obviously, Senator Brian Hughes was a Senate author, but in the House, we were working it through those last 11 days. It passed in 11 days after it died in the House. And they had kind of this diagram of how we were going to navigate all these deadlines and pitfalls and so on. And everything worked out so well. And so I just, that's one of the things that was notable about this session is good friends that we've known for a long time that we got to work hand in hand with legislation. And it's been exceptional. And I think a lot of people are going to see that as now members go back to their district. But, the House, not to make excuses, but the House split was a little tight if you want to think Republican and Democrat. And several of these bills were bipartisan, but still strong majority of Republicans supporting these bills. I mean, the House was 83-67. And, it's a little bit tighter a lot of times because the Speaker doesn't vote or doesn't vote on a lot of issues primarily. And so you got to appreciate some of that. And that's not to suggest that there wasn't a Republican majority, but it can be a little bit tighter sometimes. Members aren't on the floor. Things get a little bit interesting. And so that was a key. It was some of the members that we've known for a while from their first session to see them in these opportunities. They weren't the ones like proposing amendments or trying to strengthen bills. They were the ones, the authors and the leaders of these particular important pieces of legislation.
Well, again, we're going to have many of those individuals in studio, of course, some by phone, but certainly we've had Candy Noble in studio. We plan to do that. Of course, Jeff Leach has been in studio for many years with us, and Matt Shaheen and Matt Krause has obviously been here. So we'll spend some time talking with them and doing a little bit of post-analysis as well. But again, I want to do what I can to promote what will take place on June 11th in the Dallas area. Turns out Nick Pitt's going to be hosting the program that day, so I'll have a chance probably to join you as well and get a chance. And we encourage a lot of our listeners to do so, so we'll have that link for you as well. But just before we run out of time, let's talk about the fact that, all this work and all this time and attention sometimes focuses all your time on trying to make a difference in the legislature. Now, maybe where there's a little bit of a break where you can focus back on fundraising. And I hope people don't take for granted the fact that you have a very significant budget that needs to be met at Texas Values. So talk about how those of us who are listeners and have appreciated the work you've done can support you.
Well, there's a little document hanging up somewhere in my office, and one of the quotes is, "You can't save the world if you can't pay the bills." And so it is a part of our reality. We have close to $1 million budget, and so we got to continue to raise that. And look, the stakes really got up during the legislative session. We had more people involved in our work as far as paid individuals. We had more volunteers. Kerby, we had 185,000 messages sent to the Texas Capitol, the House, the Senate, the governor, lieutenant governor, speaker, more messages and more activity than we have ever seen. It was incredible. And so, but that's, look, in order to continue to do that, to have that technology, to have that infrastructure and staff and team, you have to have those financial resources. And we're excited, though, because what it's telling us is people see that the return on investment is pretty strong and high. And so we want to encourage people to continue that. We end our fiscal year at the end of June. That's how we go, July 1 to June 30th. And so it's really an important time for us to really replenish. I mean, there's not a lot of time to focus on that during the legislative session. But now as we get into June, we got 30 days or so left. People can really set us up to be replenished and for the next chapter of what we're going to do. We're going to now educate people about laws. There's a battle coming up at the State Board of Education potentially on sex education. There's some local issues coming up that you'll see us talk about on our website. And so we still have some work that we need to do for the second half of the year.
I certainly understand that only so well. And so I look forward to chatting with you next Monday. Look forward, as Lord willing, that I'll get a chance to see you face-to-face next Tuesday. So thank you for the diligence that you've had down there in Austin. Look forward to next week and opportunities to work with you in the future.
Well, God bless you, Kerby. Look, we were on your show quite continuously or on a regular basis throughout the session. Can't say enough about the critical role that you and your team and your audience played. So thank you guys so much.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to get into a couple of issues. Let me just mention that the original plan was to have a very interesting conversation we're going to have with Luis Palau. He has cancer, and this was just not a good day for him, so we are going to move into some other issues, and one of those will be in the next hour, the subject of abortion, because of some of the articles that have been posted, some of the comments, including some very interesting judicial opinions rendered by Clarence Thomas. So we'll focus a little bit of time and attention on that. We'll also be talking about the, if you will, graduated tariffs on Mexico by President Donald Trump, so we'll get into that. But when we come back from the break, one of the things that I thought I'd start out with is that there was a call for pastors all over the country to pray for the president yesterday, and the president showed up at McLean Bible Church, and I want you to hear the prayer of that pastor for the president. All that coming up right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention that we're going to spend some time in the next hour kind of getting into some of the issues in the news, in part because, first of all, front page of USA Today survey most oppose anti-abortion efforts in state. And those, of course, are reactions to two states. It would be Georgia and Mississippi in particular. But it's just a good example of telling the truth, but only half the truth. And that is, yes, there are, without a doubt, a number of individuals, as you can see in this poll, which we'll talk about next hour, that feel like some of the laws that were passed in Georgia, the heartbeat law, or in Mississippi or other places, may be too extreme. But the other part that's left out is there are a whole lot of Americans, maybe even a majority of Americans, that are concerned about some of the laws that have been passed in places like New York and now attempted to be passed in Virginia, which would allow abortion right up to the moment of birth. And so what we get is sort of half the story. So that's something that sort of was a news peg to hang so many other things I wanted to talk about, which we'll get to in the next hour. Justice Clarence Thomas, in a very important decision that came out of the state of Indiana, actually spent some time reminding people in his concurring opinion, which went on for 20 pages, about how Planned Parenthood was involved in the so-called Margaret Sanger Negro Project. That was basically eugenics against the African-American people. Then, of course, also we've had these various articles. One, the video that we talked about in one of my appeals, a fetus is like cancer. Then a couple of very interesting articles that have come out in the New York Times. Pregnancy kills, abortion saves lives. No, it doesn't. I mean, that you actually thought that was a typo, but no, it's not. It's where it was. And then one that I want to talk about for just a few minutes. Glenn Stanton talks about this piece that came out, A Pastor's Case for the Morality of Abortion. And then we'll get into just the whole attempt on the part of the media to really kind of bias the way we see these articles, and especially some pieces on how this whole debate about abortion is still pretty much a debate about how to frame it. I've said on this program before, and I'll say it in an upcoming commentary, that he who defines the terms oftentimes wins the debate. And the media has been complicit in defining terms in such a way as to prevent people from really understanding what is taking place with abortion. So we'll get into all of that next hour. And then in the third hour, or the 2 o'clock hour, Dr. Darrell Bock will be with us. We'll be talking about some really great material that we have from the Hendricks Center. So I want to spend some time talking about that. Also, of course, we've talked about this issue of anti-Semitism, replacement theology, and a variety of others. So those will be topics we'll put on the table as well. And so I think you'll enjoy that conversation. But let me just for a few minutes mention that there was a call, and I was out of the country, but I did see this in some emails, a call to be praying for the president yesterday. And President Donald Trump, actually on his way back from a golf outing, made an unexpected visit to McLean Bible Church, which is in McLean, Virginia, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. Now, just a personal note, I've actually attended when I went to Georgetown University, McLean Bible Church. I've actually preached in that church. That's back when it was a small church. Now, I think anybody would agree that McLean Bible Church is a mega church. First, the pastor was Lon Solomon for so many years, and then now David Platt, who is the pastor. Well, nevertheless, it was a special day to pray for the president, and so then when the president shows up, it's like, okay, David Platt says, well, let me pray for the president, and it turned out to be kind of a barn burner because he got up there, and first of all, the president didn't exactly look like the president. As a matter of fact, when I first saw this picture, I said, yeah, I guess that's him, but what happens is after he'd played golf, he slicked his hair back, so I don't think I've seen him with his hair slicked back. Second of all, he had his golf outfit, so then he put a suit coat over it, so he didn't exactly look like the Donald Trump you normally think of, but nevertheless stood on the platform, head bowed, and this is rather short, but still it's going to be lengthy. summary of the prayer by David Platt. And I thought it was pretty interesting, so I thought I'd pass it on to you. He said, "Oh God, we praise you as the one universal King over all. You are our leader and our Lord, and we worship you. There is one God and one Savior, and it's you. Your name is Jesus, and we exalt you, Jesus." So starts out by certainly spending some time talking about who we were praying to. He says, "As we know, we need your mercy, we need your grace, we need your help, we need your wisdom in our country. And so we stand right now on behalf of our president and pray for your grace and your mercy and your wisdom upon him." He then went on to say, "God, we pray that he would know how much you love him, you much that you sent Jesus to die for his sins, our sins. So we pray that he would look to you. We also praise and trust in you. We would lean on you, that he would govern and make decisions in ways that are good for justice and good for righteousness, good for equity, even every good path." Then David Platt goes on to say, "Lord, we pray that you would give him all the grace he needs to govern in ways we just saw in 1 Timothy chapter 2, that he will lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way." In 1 Timothy 2, that's where you have this admonition that Paul says, first of all, I encourage you to pray, and actually for those in positions of leadership. So they had actually looked at that verse and then, of course, prayed for the president. Then David Platt goes on to say, "God, we pray for your blessing in that way upon his family. We pray that you would give them strength. We pray that you would give them clarity and wisdom. Wisdom, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Please, O God, give him wisdom. Help him lead our country alongside other leaders." We pray today for leaders in Congress. We pray for leaders in courts. We pray for leaders at national and state levels. Please, O God, help us look to you. Help us trust in your word. Help us to seek your wisdom and live in ways that reflect your love and your grace, your righteousness, your justice. We pray for your blessing on our president toward that end. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So that was, and I probably left some pieces out there, a summary of a fairly lengthy prayer for the President of the United States, who made an unexpected trip to McLean Bible Church. And David Platt, who, by the way, has been on the program with us before, probably need to get him back again just to maybe hear his experience there. But if nothing else, certainly something that he actually encouraged. And in this particular article by Mike Hayes, he goes on to say that President Trump, despite what his reputation might suggest, welcomes prayer, soaks it up humbly. In fact, he's been known to plead with members of his faith council to surround him in wisdom and prayer. And as the founder of Stream, which is what I'm quoting from right now, James Robison wrote last week, "We are seeing miraculous answers to prayer for which we as believers are so grateful." And then he added, certainly, that pray for positive progress to continue as we ask God to protect, strengthen, encourage, and guide the president. So it was kind of interesting. The president dropped by McLean Bible Church. Then he and his wife, Melania, flew to England. Of course, that's where all the issues are focused right now. Meeting with the Prime Minister Theresa May, of course, enjoying a banquet with Queen Elizabeth, dealing with some of the, I think, what be honest to say, false press reports about that. Then from England going on to France to commemorate the 75th anniversary of D-Day on Thursday. So while the president is away from the country, he certainly had prayers from those individuals there at McLean Bible Church, including the prayers from the pastor, David Platt. Let me just mention before we take a break that my commentary today is entitled Intact Families. And one of the reasons I wanted to post this is because we have just so much evidence that has come through various refereed scholarly journals over the years to actually show that intact families are the best way to raise children. Now, again, I recognize that there are a number of single parents over the years that have done an outstanding job. A little bit later, I may spend some time talking about Ben Carson and his testimony before Congress, but he was raised by a single mom, and he turned out very well. But all the evidence simply shows that children that are raised in intact families rather than broken families do better. And the evidence also shows, and this is something I have in this commentary, that children that are raised in families that attend religious services do much better than those who worship less frequently than once a week. They, for example, The children in those former groups are 5 times less likely to repeat a grade, less likely to have behavior problems at home and school, and more likely to be cooperative and understanding of others' feelings. So if you've ever wondered, I'm spending all this time with my kids raising them, is it really going to make a difference? Yes, it does. And of course, you can look at the flip side of that, which I'll talk about after the break, because in my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, which was something I was teaching on in Budapest, Hungary, shows the negative side of divorce on children. We'll talk more about that in just a minute, but I just thought I would point you to that commentary today. It's available to you. If you already don't receive it in your inbox, you can sign up and receive it so that you receive one of my commentaries every single day. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention the next hour we're going to get into this whole issue of abortion, how the media covers it, some of the biased perspectives that happen in that regard. And so if you'd like to join us then, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention Darrell Bock will be with us in the next hour after that. That would be the 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock hour. We're going to first of all talk about some of the great work being done at the Hendricks Center. I had a chance to go to an event where they were featuring that, also his Table podcast, but also given the fact that he comes from a Jewish background has been a teacher at Dallas Seminary. Maybe talk about this whole idea of anti-Semitism, replacement theology, and a number of other things, as well as many other topics in terms of cultural engagement. So I think you're really going to enjoy that conversation. And, of course, I encourage your participation in it as well. 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention before I run out of time here that my commentary today is on intact families. And one of the things we're finding is when you look at the data, it really does show, as it always seems to, that the Bible's idea is the right one. And that is Dr. Patrick Fagan, who we've interviewed before, actually taking data from the National Survey of Children's Health, found, first of all, that children that grow up in intact families do better than children who do not. And children who grow up in families that attend religious services do better than children that do not. That doesn't mean that atheistic kids are going to be reprobates. It doesn't mean that a child being raised by a single parent has no future. But if you want to talk about the odds, if you will, then that is pretty significant because, as he found, there is a significant discrepancy between children who grew up in intact two-parent families and those who came from broken families, and a very similar discrepancy between those who attend religious services and those who worship less frequently. Now, one part of that is some of those individuals from broken families maybe never had one formed, and that is where it was single parents from the moment it began, but those that are broken also are affected by the issue of divorce. So my last paragraph goes into the fact that if you have looked at this research at all, and again, the research on things like family formation and divorce, some of the best studies that have been posted are done by individuals who, frankly, could not sign the doctrinal statement of your church. In many cases, they're secular people. Sometimes they're secular Jewish people. Judith Reisman fits into that category. Sometimes they're Orthodox Jewish people. Diane Medved fits in that category. And a number of others like Patrick Fagan, who I guess you would probably call an evangelical Christian. But it's amazing how many of these studies have been done by people that don't start from Christian presuppositions, but end up with Christian conclusions. And when you talk about divorce, you end up with, I call the 3 E's, and this commentary only mentions those, but you can do a search on our Viewpoints commentaries to find more, or you can even go on to various websites, including probe.org, where I publish a lot of this material, or in my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, to point out that the 3 E's are, first of all, the emotional impact that divorce has on children, which was much greater than the secular researchers ever would have imagined, continuing into adult children of divorce. So first of all, the emotional impact. Number 2, the educational impact. Oftentimes, divorce can have the impact of actually reducing educational success by almost 1 grade year. And then number 3, the economic impact, because oftentimes single mothers are actually almost driven into poverty. So when you talk about the importance of intact families, when you talk about the impact of divorce, just some really interesting statistics, interesting research that has come down and finding its way in some of these academic journals, refereed journals that I thought I might mention. And so if nothing else, did want to mention that my commentary is there for you today if you would like to print it out. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd kind of like to see your commentary every day, and I've run into people, matter of fact, just the other day, I'm in Hungary, I'm meeting somebody, yeah, I read your commentary every day. Well, that's great, because it does come out by email, so there's no reason there. But if nothing else, we have all these intact families, and you can go to that and print it out. And then you have some Viewpoints commentaries, and those are available, and also an opportunity if you'd like to sign up. We send them out so that you can receive my commentary Monday through Friday. You receive Penna Dexter's commentary on Saturday. Finally, let me just mention that I will have a commentary coming out on what are called deep fakes. Now, I'm over in Europe at the time when I read about this, but because I was in Europe, it meant something, because in Austria, they have been talking about what are called deep fakes. Now, deep fakes are kind of like fake news on video. Does that make sense? And, of course, the reason they were bringing that up at the time is because of the so-called deep fake, supposedly a speech that was given by Nancy Pelosi that was falsely edited. Well, over in Austria, it turns out, deep fakes have been used for some time where they'll take a photo of an individual or a video of a person and they'll put it on another person. And so as a result, these sometimes look real. And one of the people writing about this said, we still aren't to the point with our technology to make it look totally real. If you've ever watched Forrest Gump, you know what I'm talking about with Forrest Gump? You know, you see Forrest Gump supposedly shaking hands with President John F. Kennedy, talking to Lyndon Johnson, and of course, none of that actually happened. And so in the past, that kind of technology was really sort of cutting-edge video editing technology that only maybe Hollywood had access to. Well, if you have access to even iMovie on your MacBook, but especially if you have like Premiere or a variety of others, you can come up with something that looks pretty accurate. And so as a result, these are what are now being called deep fakes. And so, of course, there was a big controversy about whether or not this video that was shown of Nancy Pelosi was actually a true video. Then, of course, the decision by some Trump supporters and others to pass it on when it turned out to be a deep fake. You're starting to see that what we've been able to do with Photoshop in photos, and believe me, I'm getting pretty good with Lightroom and even Photoshop. I know how these photo editing tools can be used. Now you're maybe going to see the same kinds of things that will be happening in video. All that to say that then when you see a video of somebody saying or doing something that doesn't quite feel right, it could be an example of deep fakes. The flip side of this, I'm going to talk about this in my commentary coming out next week, is this also gives an excuse for people that have maybe actually had an accurate video of them actually doing something or saying something they shouldn't say. Now, as more and more people understand what these so-called deep fakes are, that'll give them an excuse and say, what you see in the video never happened. It's a deep fake video of me, even if it really was a genuine video. So we'll see where we go. But the point I'm so often trying to make here on Point of View is the fact that when you see, read, or hear something, use discernment. Just because it comes even from a outstanding media operation doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And if it comes from a tweet by even the President of the United States, especially by maybe the President of the United States, don't always believe it. Discernment is going to be the name of the game here in the 21st century because some of this technology can be used and, as you might imagine, misused in inappropriate ways. Well, let me just encourage you to go to our website. You're going to find some of the articles today, including this commentary on viewpoints, as well as the conversation we had in the first part of this hour with Jonathan Saenz. We come back, we're going to get into this issue of abortion, how the media miscovers, poorly covers, and maybe even biasly covers some of this issue, and also some of the comments from a sitting Supreme Court justice on the issue of Planned Parenthood and eugenics. All that coming up right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. As you may have noticed, if you've been listening to this program, that I've been out. I was out of the country and doing some teaching. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But first of all, I want to just thank Penna Dexter for sitting in here for me, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews and Nick Pitts. But I'm back and looking forward to a week in which we're going to cover a lot of very important issues. Let me just give you as a program note, those of you that received some of the advanced publicity on the program, our original plan was to spend some time today talking with Luis Palau, a new book that has come out about his life. But as you may know about the evangelist Luis Palau, he has been stricken by cancer, and we were wondering how healthy he would be for this interview and decided that maybe this was not the best day to do so. So we will postpone that interview, but I think there is some great material in his book, not only about him, but also his interaction with Dr. Billy Graham. I learned some more things about Dr. Graham, as well as just the whole idea of evangelism, platform evangelism, and the real need for us to present the gospel in America, but around the world. So again, we will come back to that. But that gave me an opportunity to talk about some of the issues in the news. A little bit later, we'll talk about this graduated tariff that the president is bringing against Mexico because of the issue of immigration. But I thought I would start by first talking about the issue of abortion, and there's a couple of reasons for that. I've been wanting to, as I've been gone, to come back to some very important things that have been taking place. For example, there was a ruling that came down from the Supreme Court out of a case out of Indiana. And even though that ruling was 7-2, perhaps the most significant part of that ruling came from Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, a 20-page concurring opinion in which he spends some time talking about how abortion was used to achieve eugenic goals, and how there was, under Margaret Sanger, the so-called Negro Project, and how that whole issue of Planned Parenthood and eliminating African Americans and those kinds of things is really documented in his piece in the Supreme Court. Then, of course, we've had this video that's been circulating. I talked about that earlier in May, that the fetus is like cancer, which then led me to also see that there are all sorts of very good pieces of evidence right now that the mainstream media have not done a good job of even letting the average person understand what really is involved in abortion. So we're going to talk about that issue of media bias as it relates to abortion. And then while we're talking about that, a piece that came in the New York Times, Pregnancy Kills, Abortion Saves Lives. When you first saw that, you said, that's got to be a joke. Really? I mean, but nevertheless, a late-term abortionist argues that pregnancy is actually more dangerous than abortion. And then more recently, a piece that Glenn Stanton wrote in response to, interestingly enough, one of the writers, a pastor's case for the morality of abortion. So I sort of wanted to get to some of that sometime this week. But the reason I decided to focus on it today is if you get USA Today, you will notice the front page, most oppose anti-abortion efforts in states. Now, here is, again, one of the reasons why so often here on Point of View, we encourage you to exercise some level of discernment, because this is an example of, while true, it only tells you half the story. I think the more accurate way to have explained this is to say that you have a significant number of Americans, true, that feel that some of the laws that have come out of Georgia or Mississippi maybe are too extreme. But at the same time, there's also a significant number of individuals, probably most of you that listen to this program, that are also concerned about the fact that now more and more states, fearing that Roe versus Wade might be overturned, are basically legalizing abortion right up to birth. Birth abortion almost, because you see what happened in New York State, what was attempted to happen in Virginia, what's happened in other states in the Northeast. And this, of course, only looks at one aspect, and as a matter of fact, draws some heavy doses of conclusion from some questions in the survey that frankly don't justify the conclusion. The survey that was done by USA Today and Ipsos says, do you think the renewed national focus on abortion and laws impacting abortion is good or bad for America? Good, 43%, bad, 57%. Well, you could see that people could be responding to that in light of Georgia or in light of New York. And so that doesn't even sort of separate out the two, because the primary focus, you talk about the media and even some of the people doing these surveys that are looking at this only with blinders, they're only looking at Georgia and Mississippi and maybe a few other states that are talking about that as an issue. And then so they find that, again, a percentage of individuals oppose the fetal heartbeat bills. Even the article here by Susan Page says the so-called fetal heartbeat laws, so-called, I mean, you get an idea of some of the bias there. But then they also found that nearly 3-1 oppose seeing all abortion facilities in their states closed, a possibility, of course, that might take place in Missouri. And so the poll goes on to a lot of other issues, but I think it illustrates the point that, first of all, yes, we do have a number of people in this country, a very significant number of people in this country, that are a little uneasy about outlawing all abortions. But at the same time, we also have a significant number of individuals that feel like the current laws, which allow essentially abortion on demand right up to time of birth, especially in some of these states, they feel uneasy about that as well. And the press, only looking at it with one set of lenses, with one perspective, isn't giving you the other perspective. And so this is why, as we open up for some of the comments and questions, I would love to hear your thoughts about this. Do you think that some of these laws in places like Georgia, Mississippi, and others are maybe too extreme? You've had even some Christian opinion leaders, I think Pat Robertson and some others said that. But at the other hand, are you also concerned about the fact that because there are a number of those, especially in some of the so-called blue states, that are concerned that Roe versus Wade might be overturned, that they want to provide unhindered access to abortion, so you have laws like you have in the state of New York? So if nothing else, because USA Today decided to start with that, we'll spend some time, we come back from the break, getting into it. But also, I want to certainly also recognize that when you ask these surveys, oftentimes people don't really understand what abortion is. You would think that they would, but as you will see in just a few minutes, there are those individuals that are actually pointing out that the style manuals that have been developed about what you can and cannot say, for example, let's just take National Public Radio. If you look at the NPR style manual now, it says that there are certain terms you can't use. Pro-life, late-term abortion, fetal heartbeat, partial birth abortion. Okay, so what do they use? Well, instead, they use terms like intact dilation and extraction. That's to try to explain partial birth abortion. I would imagine most people have no idea what that means, except for those who are medically trained. You can't use the term abortion clinic, so they say you have to talk about it as a medical and health clinic that performs abortion. Well, we'll come back and talk about how, in some respects, we see the truthfulness of something I talk about so often here. He who defines the terms oftentimes can win the debate. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Are single-parent families just as good for children as two-parent families? Some of the headlines recently in newspapers and news magazines seem to say so. But all you have to do is look back at academic studies to see that, in nearly every case, two parents are better than one. One older family study deserves renewed attention. Dr. Patrick Fagan, using data from the National Survey of Children's Health, found two important factors. Children who grow up in an intact family and attend religious services do better than children who do not. There is a significant discrepancy between children who grew up in intact two-parent families and those who came from broken homes. They also found a similar discrepancy between those who attend religious services weekly and those who worship less frequently. They found that children in the former groups were 5 times less likely to repeat a grade, less likely to have behavior problems at home and school, and more likely to be cooperative and understanding of others' feelings. They also found that these differences held true even after controlling for family income and poverty, as well as for the parents' education level, race, and ethnicity. In essence, the study suggests that the best prescription for society is a stable family and family worship. In this environment, children thrive emotionally and achieve academically. You know, in a sense, the study is a flip side of studies that were published years ago about the impact of divorce on children. In my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, I talk about the 3 E's of negative impact of divorce. That would be emotional impact, educational impact, and economic impact. So whether you look at these positive studies or the earlier negative studies, you can see the importance of family and worship. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let's see, on the subject of abortion, if you'd like to join us, let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. A couple of issues we put on the table. Do you think that the laws out of Georgia and Mississippi and other places are too extreme? Of course, there are going to also be laws out of eventually probably Texas, Louisiana, a number of other places. Or do you think that there is a need for us to also call attention to what is happening in the state of New York and others? But I thought for just a minute, just as a side note, but a very important note, to look at this case that was actually addressed by the Supreme Court. It was an abortion case in kind of tangential ways, but still important. It was one that challenged certainly some of the laws on abortion. It was signed by then Governor Mike Pence, who of course now is the vice president, and the law required that fetal remains be disposed of in a respectful manner. It also banned abortions performed solely on the basis of race, sex, or disability of the unborn. The court upheld this disposal requirement 7-2. It didn't really rule on the other part of that law, so we'll see where that is. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy. But for nothing else, now Planned Parenthood can be possibly barred from selling fetal tissue, but it also, at the same time, still apparently could discriminate on the basis of race, sex, or disability. Okay, that all back on the side. But in the concurring opinion by Justice Clarence Thomas, who is African American, he addressed this issue, and I certainly applaud him. So if you'll permit me for just a moment, I want to mention at least a couple of things that he said in his opinion. For example, Clarence Thomas said the use of abortion to achieve eugenic goals is not merely hypothetical. He says the foundations for legalizing abortion in America were laid during the early 20th century birth control movement. Very true. He then goes on to say that movement developed alongside the American eugenics movement, also true, and significantly, Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger recognized the eugenic potential of her cause. That's to put it mildly. And if you've ever seen, say, a movie by Dinesh D'Souza, he goes into that in some detail. We've talked about this on the program, but that is one of those things that oftentimes is new information. Matter of fact, if he were to post this on a Facebook post or a Twitter feed, I think some people say he doesn't know what he's talking about, except, of course, he does. And, of course, also the concurring opinion has a number of endnotes, and you can check them out for yourself. Anyway, Clarence Thomas goes on to say, and with today's prenatal screening test and other technologies, abortion can easily be used to eliminate children with unwanted characteristics. Goes on to say, moreover, abortion has proven to be a disturbingly effective tool in implementing the discriminatory preferences that undergird eugenics. Then he gives us a little bit of history. Clarence Thomas says 8 decades after Margaret Sanger's Negro Project, that's what she called it, abortion in the United States is also marked by a considerable racial disparity. There are areas in New York City in which black children are more likely to be aborted than they are likely to be born alive, and are 8 times more likely to be aborted than white children in the same area. You got to love Clarence Thomas for saying something in a judicial opinion that sometimes we've had a chance over the years by interviewing particular guests here on Point of View. He goes on to make one other point. I won't belabor it, but if you'd like to read it, it's probably available through the Supreme Court. Enshrining, he says, a constitutional right to an abortion based solely on the race, sex, or disability of an unborn child, as Planned Parenthood advocates, would constitutionalize, the views of the 20th century eugenics movement. Although the court declines to wade into these issues today, it cannot avoid them forever. This is a nice way of saying, we didn't maybe rule on the Indiana part of that law on race, sex, or disability, but we may come back to it later on, maybe in a particular case that might even overturn Roe versus Wade. And so Gary Bauer, taking some of this, said, Justice Thomas's opinion is a stunning statement with historic implications. His analysis, he goes on to say, is spot on, and I believe one day a majority of the Supreme Court will agree with Clarence Thomas that nothing in the Constitution requires a state to tolerate eugenic abortions. But then Gary Bauer points out something I had not seen. He said, not surprisingly, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's also a Supreme Court justice, took issue with Thomas's reasoning. What was surprising is she took issue with his definition of the word mother. In her dissent, Ruth Bader Ginsburg declared, a woman who exercises her constitutionally protected right to terminate a pregnancy is not a mother. And so I think it's kind of interesting, which now leads us to what I think is a good illustration of media bias. But nevertheless, he points out that many of these progressives have been educated at our finest institution. They don't seem to know that fetus is Latin for unborn baby and that a pregnant woman is a mother. And the left considers itself, he says, a party of science. Which brings us to the reason why sometimes when we see these surveys on abortion, you have to take them with a grain of salt for 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is, if I ask a question that focuses on a woman's right, I'm more likely to get a pro-choice, pro-abortion answer. If instead I focus on the life of the unborn, I'm more likely to get a pro-life answer. So how the question is asked is sometimes determinative of what kind of answer you get in your poll. But there's a second issue, and that's the one I want to address right now. I don't think, even at this late date, a lot of Americans really understand what abortion is. You say, how in the world? We've had abortion legal since 1973. Yes, but there are all sorts of attempts to try to sort of smooth over what is actually taking place. Don't take my word for it. Let me go back to a piece written by a New York columnist, Russ Duthat, who's been on the program with us before. His quote, I think, is really applicable right here. He says conservative complaints about media bias are sometimes overdrawn. I agree. But on the abortion issue, the press's prejudices are often absolute, its biases blatant, and its blinders impenetrable. He says in many newsrooms and television studios across the country, Planned Parenthood is regarded as the equivalent of, well, the Komen Foundation, an apolitical, high-minded, and humanitarian institution whose work no rational person, and certainly no self-respecting woman, could possibly question or oppose. The piece goes on to then talk about the style manuals are being used. By the way, this comes in an article that I'm going to refer to in one of my future commentaries, because they talk about the style manual being developed now on the issue of climate change, global warming. And since our latest booklet that we have available to our donors is on climate change, I'll get to that. But later on, it then takes on this issue of abortion. And I've already tipped my hand. Let's take a respected news operation, National Public Radio. We around this newsroom listen to NPR and certainly appreciate that. But again, even though NPR, which is publicly funded and certainly attempts sometimes to be as objective as it possibly can on a story and giving you a point counterpoint, there are also in the NPR manual of style certain words that are no longer allowed in the broadcast or any of the written material. Those words would be words like pro-life, late-term abortion, fetal heartbeat, and partial birth. As I mentioned just a minute ago, well, then how in the world do you talk about a partial birth abortion? Well, they're to use terms like intact, dilation, and extraction. Although that is technically true, it is so misleading as to really cause people to not even understand what is taking place. We were just talking off the air about one individual that has been on the program who was describing what a partial birth abortion is and had individuals challenge his statement only for him to point to the manual. One of the individuals we've had on this program who has actually done a debate recently on the subject of abortion quoted some of this. The abortionist himself disagreed with that until he pulled up the manual and showed him this is exactly what's in the manual about how you do a partial birth abortion. So let's face it, if people that are pretty intelligent, people that are understanding some of the abortion discussions don't understand, what chance do the average American have? And then, of course, while I'm beating up NPR, because I love NPR, but at the same time, another phrase which no longer can be used is the phrase abortion doctor. The phrase that is supposed to be used is the doctor's name, and then write that this doctor operates a clinic where abortions are performed. That's very different because it sounds like it's maybe a hospital where in particular situations in which there's an extreme need, we have abortions sometimes performed, very different than, say, a Planned Parenthood clinic. Let's take a break, though. I'd love to get your thoughts. Abortions in the news. How well have we been covering that story? I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue your conversation on the subject of abortion for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Love to get your thoughts. And let's, if we can, go out to the state of Georgia. Gabriella, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, Kerby. Thank you.
What would you like to share with our audience today?
I would like to share the fact that, it's not people who make people. God makes every individual person, whether it be from even an act of violence, that person would not be in the womb if it wasn't for him forming them. It tells you in the Word, in Psalm 139, and It tells you in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, it says, "Before I formed you in the belly, I knew you. And before you came forth out of the womb, I sanctified you, and I ordained you a prophet unto the nations." Now, some are prophets, some may not be prophets, but he only uses our DNA like thread. It looks like, under a microscope, it looks like thread. That's what it is. He says he weaves you in the womb. We are just people that have been made by a beautiful and wonderful God that has formed us, and we get the opportunity to carry his creation into the world. The word born is a tense of to bear, to carry. We are vessels that carry his creation into the world, but he forms them. He even said to Rebecca, where he said, there are two nations in your womb.
Yes.
He knew who was in there. He knew, when he made Jesus, he took the DNA from Mary, but it was he who made Jesus in the womb. So every person, whether that person came from some violent act or not, or an act of love, or an act of just lust, if you will, it doesn't negate that the Lord God decided to give you the privilege of carrying one of his creation into this world.
Very good. Again, let me just reiterate some of those verses in case people are not familiar, because just recently when I was over in teaching a Word of Life in Hungary, we, of course, dealt with the issue of abortion, and I took them through Isaiah 49, Jeremiah 1. You, of course, mentioned Psalm 139, and then you might even put Psalm 51:5 and a couple of other passages that all make that case. And so you've done a very good job of making that case in a very eloquent way. And so certainly you could make the case for a pro-life perspective, a case against abortion based upon the Bible. And those are just Old Testament verses. Of course, you can go to, in the New Testament, the idea of John the Baptist leaping in the womb and some others. But you can also make the case for life and the case against abortion on the basis of medical arguments, legal arguments, philosophical arguments. We have a lot of that material on our website. And so if nothing else, that's what we are dealing with. And just before I take my next phone call, let me just come back to this issue one more time about how many times we are not getting people to tell the full story. And since I've been somewhat critical today of NPR, and these are sort of wounds of a friend, because I appreciate the work that some of the writers and the researchers and reporters at NPR, we've, matter of fact, interviewed former NPR reporters here on this program. But one of the other things that NPR has done in their manual style is say that words like unborn and baby cannot be used. And that helped explain why Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that a individual, a woman who terminates her pregnancy is not a mother, because now I'm reading this from the NPR style manual. The term unborn implies that there's a baby inside a pregnant woman, not a fetus. Okay, I have never had my wife go to a fetus shower. She always goes to what? A baby shower. So, but again, fetus is the Latin for what? Baby. Okay. Babies are not babies until they're born. This is the NPR style manual. Babies are not baby until they're born. This is NPR writing this, okay? They're fetuses. So again, the whole term here is, I'll read it through, you can get the context. The term unborn implies that there is a baby inside a pregnant woman, not a fetus. Babies are not babies until they're born. They're fetuses. Incorrectly calling a fetus a baby or the unborn is part of the strategy used by anti-abortion groups to shift language, legality, and public opinion. So that was the case. And then there was another one that was saying that a mother that does not give birth is not a mother. And so now I can understand perhaps why Ruth Bader Ginsburg actually criticized Clarence Thomas, because he used the idea of mother. So this is kind of where this game is getting really perverted in ways that a baby in the womb is not a baby, it's a fetus. And a mother who is pregnant but aborts her baby is not a mother, because a baby is not a baby until it's born. And if you can follow that logic, maybe you're better at this than I am. But let's take a few more phone calls, give some of you a chance to join our conversation. We'll go to the state of Florida this time, listening on the GNN network. And Jeannie, what would you like to add to our conversation?
All of this is just so stupid. It's amazing how the devil can start something and get people to climb on and believe it, and they distort it more and more. But I know that if a woman was in a car wreck and she was pregnant, they would take her to the hospital and do everything in their power to save that baby.
Of course.
You know, it would be such an important thing. It really would. And it's just a matter. Anybody that doesn't recognize Satan in this thing is stupid. You know, I mean, it's just, and how can people be so stupid to just, I mean, what I've been hearing you talking about the Supreme Court and Ginsburg and all that, that to me, that is just beyond belief. I mean, I got some sense, and you can take a little child if mama's pregnant and say, what's going on right there, and pat the mama's tummy. He said, that's my little brother or my little sister. I mean, everybody that's got any sense knows that that's a baby.
Well, and again, there was a book that came out years ago. I think it was Gene Gantz, and it was Who Broke the Baby? That was the title of the book, because when her little child saw this picture of an aborted baby, said, who broke the baby? So even a young child understands what abortion entails. And in order to keep everybody calm about the issue of abortion, we have to so misrepresent it and so violate common sense and so adopt political correctness as to not even communicate in an effective way anymore. And so I think you're right on target.
One other word.
Yeah.
Can I say one other word?
You certainly can.
You find any woman, I would vouch to say any woman, unless she just has no soul, that has had an abortion, and they will grieve the rest of their life. They will grieve. They do grieve. And, you know, and if they ever do get down into a place where you're talking to their spirit, they're just grieving because they have killed somebody.
And if you've ever listened to Point of View, we've had individuals that maybe had an abortion back in the 1970s who have called into this program and say they're still struggling with a decision that they made decades ago. Yeah. And yet we're told by the pro-choice and the pro-abortion groups that, no, there isn't any emotional impact at all about an abortion.
They're crazy. I've never seen anybody, of course, I haven't seen a lot of people that have had them. But I have heard a lot of people speak of somebody in their family that had to have an abortion or had gotten in trouble, and the mom and daddy had convinced them to do it, and they never get over it. It's just something, you know, they never get over.
Again,
but anyway, that was my comments.
They're good comments. And again, let me salute those of you that work in pregnancy resource centers, those of you that actually picket outside of abortion clinics, pray outside of abortion clinics, because you're on the front lines of these issues. And for women that are struggling, maybe listening right now and saying, you know, I just feel this overwhelming guilt, women that have been exploited by abortion, I would encourage you to seek out your local pregnancy resource center, because they probably have, I'm sure they probably have all sorts of programs to reach out and to help you deal with guilt, shame, other things that you're addressing. And so one of the reasons I decided to do abortion today, which is a topic that's always in the news, but is because of the front page article in USA Today, but also the very cogent and very well-written piece by Justice Clarence Thomas, and as she just referred to just a minute ago, the rather bizarre comments by Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and some of these requirements now, and I'm just using NPR, we can go to CNN and CBS and NBC and ABC and some of the others that have sort of style menus to prevent you from really knowing what is taking place when an abortion is performed. We come back, we'll take some more phone calls. And before we're done this hour, I do want to spend some time talking about some of these bizarre articles like Pregnancy Kills, Abortion Saves Lives. That one was in the New York Times. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that in studio next hour, we're going to be talking with Dr. Darrell Bock, of course, a good friend from Dallas Theological Seminary. He's the host of the Seminary's Table podcast. He's with the Hendricks Center. We're going to be talking about the good work that is being done there at the Hendricks Center, but also as an individual that serves on the board of Wheaton College and Chosen People Ministries. Given his background as well, I want to talk a little bit about the subject of anti-Semitism, replacement theology, a few issues related to that as well. And so I encourage you to join with us that hour as we get into that conversation. But let's head back to the phones. We have quite a number of you would like to address this issue of abortion, and we're bringing it up for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is some of the surveys that have been done, some of the Supreme Court decisions, and even more recently, an article that appeared in the New York Times, Pregnancy Kills, Abortion Saves Lives. Really? I mean, you had to wonder if that was a typo. No, it's not. And then more recently, an article that came in Atlantic, A Pastor's Case for the Morality of Abortion. Well, first of all, that is not true. Second of all, I'm not sure what kind of pastor that is as well. But nevertheless, let's go back to the phones and give you a chance to weigh in with your perspective here on Point of View. We'll head to Maine. Bob, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Hi, Kerby. Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Well, I see a lot of signs around here. They seem mostly to be directed towards Christians. They're kind of baby blue, which is kind of funny. And they say that, hate has no home here at that particular house or homestead. But to make a long story short, I think it's just a projection on their part because from my perspective, and I think from anybody who's sensible, the only difference between pro-choice people and people that love everybody, which is the pro-life people, is that we love more people than they do, and they hate us for it.
Yeah, I know. It's so funny. People will say, I can't believe how intolerant you are. And it said, look, I mean, we've got a multi-ethnic Sunday school class. I have good relationships with every single person in my neighborhood, and you're the only hateful person I see that's making any kind of statements like that right now. So it's always interesting. There is a sense, I think you're right, of projection, that they are intolerant. They are sometimes hateful. And most importantly, I think maybe in their conscience, they know that they actually are killing a baby inside the womb. So that's why they go out of their way, as these style manuals are going, saying a baby is not a baby until it's born. They're a fetus. So if you call it a baby or an unborn baby, you're just really trying to advance your agenda. No, like I said before, my wife has never been to a fetus shower. She always goes to baby showers. That tells you a lot right there, doesn't it? If we want the baby, it's called a baby. If we don't, then it's a product of conception. And that linguistic confusion, I think, is intentional. So, Bob, I appreciate you calling today.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's fear on their part. They don't want to admit the truth. I think they're really afraid of the truth.
Well, and also afraid that, indeed, Roe versus Wade might be overturned. Let's just be honest, even if it is, and I don't see it happening in the next year, but even if it is, all it does is simply go back to the states, and then you're going to have some states like New York that are probably going to have very liberal laws on abortion. You're going to have other states like Georgia, Mississippi, which you just mentioned, that have more conservative laws on abortion. But we'll see where that goes. Let's go back to the phones, and we'll go to Arizona this time. KNLB. Trina, thank you for calling today. Do we have Trina? Maybe we don't have Trina. Well, we'll put Trina on hold, and we will go to Sid in Georgia. Sid, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Hello, Kerby. About 40 years ago, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and an old girlfriend called me, wanted to know if she could come to Atlanta, spend the night at my house, and if I would take her to the abortion clinic the next morning.
Wow.
Which I did. And that was about 5 o'clock in the morning. So I dropped her off. Somebody else came and picked her up. And about, I guess, 2-3 years later, I saw that same girl at a convenience store coming out of the store, and she was carrying like a almost newborn baby. And when I saw her, I didn't know what to say.
Did I lose you? Yeah.
No, I'm still here.
Okay.
But anyway, she didn't know what to say either. So
I
anyway,
assume she saved the baby. Is that what you're saying?
No. She had that abortion.
Oh, she did.
And 2 years later, I saw her, and she had another baby.
Had a baby. Okay, I see. Oh, okay. I know that kind of choked you up here, and I wanted to give a few more callers a chance to join our conversation. But, incredible story, and I'd love to know, how she felt about the earlier abortion, but I think we know that answer. I tried to get Trina just a minute ago in Arizona. Trina, do I have you now?
I think so. I hope so.
Okay, go for it. What would you like to add to our conversation?
My phone was acting up.
Yeah.
Okay, explain to me when that child first moves in your belly that's not a child.
Oh, I know. I mean, you just have
And
so
when
many things that you know. Go ahead.
Exactly. I was 32 weeks pregnant when I had a rollover car accident, a bad one. And they were more concerned with the child in my belly, my daughter, than they were concerned about everything else. They wanted to make sure she was okay and make sure that I was going to be okay. My accident was really bad, but she's here. I had shattered my shoulder. They were considering delivering her so they could try and repair my shoulder. I mean, how can people not understand that that's an individual? That person is separate from you. I just don't understand it. My daughter moved from the whole time. It seemed like from conception, she moved the whole time.
And they certainly do. Well, again, I just think whether you take some of the arguments we've used earlier, like if there's a car crash we talked about with Jeannie, or your situation, or all the rest, or if a pregnant woman is killed, we consider it a double homicide. I mean, just all the ways in which we have just a illogical kind of set of circumstances that have been foisted upon us because of this abortion decision. So we'll certainly come back to this conversation in the future. Let me just give you a program note, because in just a few minutes we're going to, as we come back in the next hour, talk with Darrell Bock, who, of course, is with the Hendricks Center and Dallas Theological Seminary. It's always a privilege to have him on. Of course, he's the host of the Seminary's Table podcast. We'll be talking about that, get into a variety of other issues. But one of the themes I wanted to talk about this month in June as we come to our year end is It's Morning in America. That was a campaign theme that Ronald Reagan had. And it's one that we thought we might use as well, because even in the midst of some of the negative news that we talk about so often here on Point of View, there are just a lot of things that are positive, a lot of victories that we talk about with Kelly Shackelford in the area of religious liberty. Just an increase in the economic opportunities because of some of the changes that have taken place. So this month, we really are going to highlight some of these positive actions. Of course, even today, we've been talking about some of the decisions that came down in the Supreme Court on that case, 7-2. Of course, we've talked about some of these pro-life laws in places like Georgia and Mississippi. So I hope that you'll kind of stay with us during the entire month as we talk about some of these areas of encouragement and positive news that you probably aren't going to hear so much in the mainstream media. That's why we encourage you to support Point of View and to keep listening to Point of View. We come back, though, we're going to change topics. Dr. Darrell Bock in studio with us. Always learn a great deal from him. Look forward to that opportunity. And if you want to find some more of the material we've talked about today on the program, visit our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
As I've been promoting, we have in studio with us today Dr. Darrell Bock. And if you would like to join us, all the phones are already ringing, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to be talking about a number of things. First of all, of course, he is an author of more than 40 books, a theologian, author of a number of great theological works as well, executive director of cultural engagement for the Hendricks Center. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute, and a senior research professor of New Testament studies, as well as a consulting editor for Christianity Today. Serves on the board of Wheaton College, as well as Chosen People Ministries, an important issue as we talk about anti-Semitism a little bit later. And, of course, a New York Times best-selling author, Dr. Darrell Bock. Always great to have you in studio.
Oh, it's great to be back, Kerby. Good to see you.
Let's talk about the Table podcast for just a minute. I'm a kind of a TED Talk junkie, but second of all, I also tend to be one of the podcast junkies that you do, because you have produced an enormous corpus of material and interviews. Now, I've had a chance to be on with you on a few, but on topics ranging from sexuality to diversity to cultural engagement, church ministry, and all that. I think you told me, 240 hours of material that's available?
Right, we have 240 hours of material that's released. We probably have recorded another 25 or 30 hours worth of stuff. I was listening to your introduction. I'm sitting here going, well, that's quite a list. Did we leave anything out? And
arts and media, diversity, religion,
exactly.
Public square.
Yeah.
Again, we have a link in case you find yourself saying, I'd like to read or see some of this material. First of all, there's a few things you can read, and there's a way you can subscribe. There's a way you can donate. But again, we have a link. It's voice.dts.edu/table podcast. But you don't have to remember all that, because that's the link right under your picture there.
That's right.
And again, you can select it on the basis of any one of those topics. And the thing that I was encouraged more recently is you were the one-man show for a long time, and I was thinking this is going to wear you out. But fortunately, you've now passed it on to some other people I think very highly of. Bill Hendricks, for example, of the Hendricks Center, and others. And so there's a couple of other people that are continuing this on. But if you are wondering, how does a Christian think about these issues, you have really done a great job of bringing the best and the brightest who come to Dallas Seminary and then sit across the table from you.
Well, the seminary model is teach truth and love well. And I really think that it's important not only to have at least a credible defense and understanding what your faith is about, but to do it with an appropriate tone. And so we very much specialize not just in what we say, but in how we say it.
Yeah.
And so, and you see that modeled in these podcasts as we work people through the issues, what's at stake in some cases, how people who don't think the way I might would think about it, that kind of thing, and how to think about engaging them. We have over probably 12 podcasts dedicated to LGBTQ issues. We have another 10 or 12 dedicated to diversity issues. We have a series that we did on world religions, in which we asked 3 questions. What's at the core of this religion? What makes it a religion? What do they believe? What makes it attractive? What I call the Velcro factor. What causes someone to stick to this religion and build their life around it? And then the third question is, how does the gospel speak into that Velcro factor? So we're trying to do it not from a comparative standpoint of how does this religion line up against the Bible, but more from the standpoint of, if you're addressing someone who's coming from that place, how would you have that conversation? And so so we think it's a good way in, and there's just a huge archive of stuff there. And so people usually show up for one podcast, and then they get curious, and then we get them.
Yeah. Well, again, you can subscribe to it. Of course, you can just dip in like I do all the time. Of course, you have some chapels
That's right.
that you've done where you've done interviews, and others, a couple of cases, you've done it with some kind of podcast or something like that where the person is not in studio. Through a variety of different venues. But again, most of those are in studio in large part simply because you have so many different individuals coming to Dallas Theological Seminary.
That's exactly right. We also have an emphasis on faith and work because we believe that the 9 to 5 hour is a part of discipleship and having people think about their work and the value of their work, et cetera. So there's a lot that's dedicated to that. And it's designed to encourage people. We did it originally for our alums, for pastors and that kind of thing, for church leaders to think about. But what we've discovered is that a lot of people are actually fascinated with the things that we're talking about and why. So everyone's welcome to the table.
Well, and again, I might just mention the one I'm planning on watching because it just came out, Faith, Work, and Hamburgers. So it's a great title. And again, the integration of faith and work, and that's certainly a topic we've addressed here. Let's talk about the broader issue for just a minute, because the Hendricks Center, in part, was just a leadership idea. And so it was a recognition that although at Dallas Theological Seminary and in many seminaries we're working very hard. Sorry, flip
no
it,
problem. Don't kill me yet.
Yeah, but a lot of these places where we educate people, Bible colleges, seminaries, and things like that, we are really good at teaching the Bible, but we don't necessarily teach leadership. So that was kind of the start. But then you have added this component, which I've always appreciated, because I know when I was trying to do some teaching at the seminary as just a visiting professor, this whole area of culture wasn't really addressed.
Exactly.
And so whether it's leadership or culture engagement, those really are two very significant aspects of the Hendricks Center, aren't they?
And they touch. And so the point was we started off, in fact, when we did a historical review of this recently at our gala, we made the point, we started off being focused on the leader and his character and those aspects of what leadership is all about. And then we realized the leader really is responsible for taking people on a journey through the world that the people live in.
Mm-hmm.
That inevitably pulls you into the cultural discussion.
Right.
And so if a leader doesn't know how to see his way through what's going on around him and his organization, then he or she's going to really have a hard time. And so we began to talk about what these elements are. And then there's another very significant change that's happened from the founding leadership until now, and that is that our culture itself has profoundly changed.
Yes.
It has profoundly changed at a variety of levels. Just the globalization, the way in which we are both bigger and smaller simultaneously because of technology, is a huge change that people are having to cope with. There are a lot of voices out there coming at people, and they're easily accessible. So that's one dimension. We have our country has to some degree lost what I call its Judeo-Christian net that kind of caught people whether they were in church or not.
Right.
And so that changes the way in which people have to think about communicating theological values to their neighbors. We've had a massive transition of people moving from different countries to different countries. I'm not just talking about immigration here. I'm just talking about people movements in general. I mean, immigration's a part of it, but large masses of people moving to different parts of the world for a variety of reasons. That changes the nature of your neighborhood. And so all these different shifts happening simultaneously have put a new set of pressures and concerns on leaders that they need to be aware of. So we are dedicated to helping them be aware of it and think through how communicating today is differently than the way we used to be able to get away with communicating. One of the lines I use on a regular basis is, we used to be able in the church to say it's true because it's in the Bible. Now we have to say it's in the Bible because it's true. And that's not the same thing. And so being able to actually think through, why would God put this in the Bible and say this is a part of authentic living, is a much different question than simply putting an imprimatur on the Bible on something that's said. And so that takes a lot more work.
We're going to take a break, and we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Darrell Bock. We're just privileged to have him here today. And if you want to know more about some of the things that happen at the Hendricks Center, we'll talk about that after the break. All that coming up right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Are single-parent families just as good for children as two-parent families? Some of the headlines recently in newspapers and news magazines seem to say so. But all you have to do is look back at academic studies to see that, in nearly every case, two parents are better than one. One older family study deserves renewed attention. Dr. Patrick Fagan, using data from the National Survey of Children's Health, found two important factors. Children who grow up in an intact family and attend religious services do better than children who do not. There is a significant discrepancy between children who grew up in intact two-parent families and those who came from broken homes. They also found a similar discrepancy between those who attend religious services weekly and those who worship less frequently. They found that children in the former groups were 5 times less likely to repeat a grade, less likely to have behavior problems at home and school, and more likely to be cooperative and understanding of others' feelings. They also found that these differences held true even after controlling for family income and poverty, as well as for the parents' education level, race, and ethnicity. In essence, the study suggests that the best prescription for society is a stable family and family worship. In this environment, children thrive emotionally and achieve academically. You know, in a sense, the study is a flip side of studies that were published years ago about the impact of divorce on children. In my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, I talk about the 3 E's of negative impact of divorce. That would be emotional impact, educational impact, and economic impact. So whether you look at these positive studies or the earlier negative studies, you can see the importance of family and worship. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Darrell Bock in Studio 2 with us today, Dr. Darrell Bock, and again, an individual that really addresses this issue of cultural engagement, and that's one of the things that happens at the Hendricks Center. And of course, let me commend to you The Table, a weekly podcast on topics related to God, Christianity, and culture. We've mentioned just a few and many more to come on the subject of diversity, difficult conversations. That one's already out, and a number of others. But just before we get back into this idea of cultural engagement, I've got a long list here of various conferences that are done by the Hendricks Center. I thought we might mention those because there are some that will be coming up in the fall. But you have LEAD, you have the Leaderboard, you have the Women's Leadership Conference, Faith and Work Conference, Leadership Conference. These are things that individuals could attend or else watch later on online, can't they?
That's exactly correct. The conferences that we do run a range of topics, much like the podcasts do. We're planning one in the fall for Dallas on the issue of sexual abuse in the church and how the church and how individual churches should handle the possibility of such a thing. I wish I could tell you a date, but we're actually negotiating with another organization about whether we're going to do it together or whether we're just going to each do our own particular version of it. And so in the next few weeks, if you're in touch with us at all, we'll be able to tell you the answer to that question. That's kind of like a mystery tease.
I think so.
And then,
and you're going out of country, but maybe get Bill Hendricks in here to talk about this. Okay?
Bill does the leadership side of what we do, and we're connected at the hip. We do everything together, but he has his area of responsibility.
Yes.
I have mine, and we. And then we've done a lot of stuff more recently trying to be ministering to the entire staff of a church. A lot of what we were doing originally was aimed particularly at the senior pastor.
Right.
And now we are dealing with staffs, and of course, multi-staffs are generally more gender diverse. And so that raises all those questions. A really easy area for the church, and then and that kind of thing. So we've got a variety of things that we do that are an attempt to minister, particularly either to people who are in vocational Christian work or your church leaders who are surround those people and help them do what they do.
Well, again, just some great resources. We have a link there to, of course, the Hendricks Center. We have a link to the Table podcast, so you can find all of those. But before we get into one of the topics I wanted to put on the table, you mentioned about this idea of cultural engagement, and that is the remarkable change. That's one of the reasons why you wanted to implement that, because there was a time, Francis Schaeffer talked about this and others, where you had at least a memory of Judeo-Christian ideas. And as you point out now, Christians can't necessarily assume that the world around us is like us. And a matter of fact, when I had a chance to go to the Hendricks Center banquet recently, Tim Keller said, if you want to understand what the United States is going to be like, look at Europe.
That's right.
And you would, I'm sure, would agree, because I just came back from Europe. You're going to be going to Europe. And that gives us an idea of how you really have to, more of an Acts 17 presentation, present to a culture that isn't necessarily familiar with Christian ideas.
And
True?
in some cases may even be hostile to it. And so the question is, how do you do that? How do you represent God and Christianity well, remembering that when God entered the world with his Son, he entered into a world that was hostile. And his entire ministry was built around reaching out to people who are hostile. I tell people one of the dangers of the culture war is that we've turned people into enemies when they're actually the goal. And so it's very, very important in the midst of our advocacy to recognize this is actually a spiritual battle. That's what Ephesians tells us, not against flesh and blood. And in the midst of that, to do so in such a way that we are inviting people into a better form of life, which what the gospel is, than the life they may be currently living. And so I like to say the good news is called the gospel, or good news, for a good reason. It's because it is good news. But we have to share it in such a way that the goodness of that news comes across. And sometimes we're so busy being critical of the culture, or angry at the culture, or frustrated with the culture, that good news barely comes through.
Yeah, you can
and
barely
sometimes
hear it.
gets muted.
Right.
And so we're trying to present an engagement that is fundamentally positive with regard to the message of the gospel, but also understands that you have to approach a person from where they start from, and that might be a step-by-step journey as opposed to a hit and run. So anyway.
Well, it's a good point, because as you point out, it is sometimes hostile. The other part of that is that sometimes it's just ambivalent. Even the surveys that we've done at Probe Ministries, some of the things we've talked about here. Tomorrow we're going to have a millennial roundtable around here, so Nick Pitts will be sitting there and a variety of other people around the table, is that for the Generation Y, millennial generation, or Generation Z, the so-called iGen generation, it's not like they're hostile on religion. They just don't even think about it. It's just not even top of the mind for them, right?
Yeah, and sometimes when someone thinks something is irrelevant, that's actually a longer distance to have to bring them than the person who's hostile. The person who's hostile has an acquaintance and has had a reaction, okay, but the person who's ambivalent thinks this doesn't even matter. It doesn't. Why should I concern myself with it at all? And so, again, getting a read, I call the first step in good cultural engagement is getting what I call a good GPS reading on someone, which means doing a lot of sitting and listening, hearing their story, where they're coming from, what their background has been, what their exposure to religion has been. Is it hostile? Do they have something in their background, etc.? And the more you let them talk and what I call mute your doctrinal meter, you'll turn it on eventually, but mute it for a while. Just listen and get a reading where they are. You're actually in a better position to engage them when you finally do engage.
Well, again, one of the other things I picked up from Tim Keller, he was talking about Larry Hurtado, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, that, the first century, it was multi-ethnic, wasn't retaliating, it was pro-life, but it also was sexual counterculture. That doesn't always describe the church in the 21st century, does it?
No, it doesn't. And the other thing that's very, very interesting is that the church understood it had no social and political power it could rely on, so it relied on God.
Yeah.
And that's actually pretty important, because despite the fact that they had no numbers to speak of, no social power. Their testimony came across so powerfully it became attractive and made people curious. There's a line that I heard this weekend at a conference that I was at from another speaker. It was great. It says, "You should live your life in such a way that it demands a question."
Yes. That's a great line.
That's a great line,
Ooh,
isn't
I like
it?
that. Yeah.
And so
say, what's wrong? Why are you different?
Why
you know?
are you different?
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
What makes you live that way? I sense there's something different about the way that you live, and it's attractive. Boom, open door.
Yeah.
So, so we're committed to trying to help people negotiate that space, which is challenging because it's hard to be disagreed with in many ways, but especially if you're convinced that you are right. Although sometimes we have things to learn, and in the midst of that, know how to approach someone who's coming from a completely different space than you are.
Well, again, that's where we talk about this idea of having some kind of graciousness and civility because, first of all, it's a golden rule. You want to treat others the way you would like to be treated. But also scriptures talk about the fact that we can learn from one another. And, the idea of civility is that even as I'm listening to someone with whom I disagree, they might have a point that I'd never thought about before. So we have to be individuals that ask questions and listen with some kind of intensity.
I can't have blind spots. I'm almost sure I have blind spots, but I can't see them unless someone points them out.
Yeah. So again, those are some of the conversations you're going to hear in the Table podcast. But after we come back from the break, I wanted to talk about the subject of anti-Semitism. Some of you may have my little booklet on anti-Semitism, but we're sitting across from a person that knows a lot more about it. And you're on the board of Chosen People Ministry, so I know you've been dealing with that, haven't you?
Yeah. In fact, I just came this weekend from a conference at Sandy Cove. Chosen People Ministries is his 125th year of existence. They are aware of what's going on globally with the Messianic movement, with the outreach to Jews. They deal with the issue of anti-Semitism on a regular basis. They are seeing it rise in parts of the world, not just here, but also in Europe. And it's a challenge. The further away we get from the Holocaust, the more we forget it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the impact of that is becoming immense.
Well, again, we're going to take a break. And, of course, I've been to the Holocaust Museum here in Dallas, the one in Washington, D.C., the one in Israel, and then, of course, right over there in Hungary, where I was, they also have I went to I guess it's the largest synagogue in Europe, second largest in the world. And just seeing some of those stories and all that is something that we're going to address after the break. So if you'd like to join the conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. If you say, I did not know a thing about the Hendricks Center, that is one of the reasons we wanted to do the broadcast. It is part of Dallas Theological Seminary. And Bill Hendricks on the leadership side, and Dr. Darrell Bock, of course, on the cultural engagement side. You have the Table podcast and all of it available on our website, pointofview.net. So take the time to visit there. And most importantly, if you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the writing of Dr. Darrell Bock, we have that link there as well. Author of more than 40 books, including, of course, the New York Times bestseller on the Da Vinci Code. So that's another one that we go back to as well as others. So let's take a break. We come back, we're going to get into this issue of anti-Semitism and how we think about this theologically. I think you'll enjoy the conversation. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back for a final hour, and we are privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Darrell Bock, an individual that, of course, is a theologian, author, director of cultural engagement at the Hendrick Center, also senior research professor of New Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary. But I want to play upon some of the background that you have in Chosen People Ministries and your own personal background. We talk about anti-Semitism. It's easy to say, well, okay, those white supremacists over there, Louis Farrakhan. But this anti-Semitism is a little more subtle than I think we've understood, and yet it seems to be on the rise dramatically in Europe and other parts even of the world, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely, and it certainly predates the most recent wave that we've seen, and it tends to ebb and flow. You know, it pops up and then it disappears, and it pops up and then it disappears.
Sure.
And really, there was a period in which, because of the Holocaust, people had a conscience about this and were sensitive to it. But the further away we get from the Holocaust and the more distant we become, the fewer people who saw and experienced that or experienced the stories of what that was, the more this is reappearing. And it's reappearing in strange places. And so it's become more complicated. It actually has a rich history. I actually say, this will sound counterintuitive, but I actually think that the push in Europe to give Israel its own homeland was a form of anti-Semitism in a way.
Interesting.
Because what it did is, let's have the Jews live there
Over
and get
there,
out of our
yes.
backyard.
Yes,
okay?
good point.
So,
hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
Good point.
So that's so, and there are even theological systems that have been built upon that premise, not stated so baldly, but probably part of what was going on, and so anti-Semitism. It's like all forms of racism, really, which are. They will never express themselves unless you're dealing with a radical directly. They will always hide it behind something else, and so that's what you see going on in a lot of cases. And unfortunately, we've had two major incidents in the last recent period here in our own country where the attack was direct.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this, because when I was writing a while back in one of my commentaries about when you're looking for easy answers for the shooters, you don't have easy answers, because, yes, some of them had mental issues, but many of them did not. Some of them had some kind of anti-Semitic ideas and others did not. I said, and before you get too comfortable by saying, well, that's just those secular people, we had one young boy who goes to an Orthodox Presbyterian church.
Yeah, if you read their doctrinal statement, you wouldn't blink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet here he's a shooter in San Diego. Well, then I had some people say, well, that's because of replacement theology, but that's just reaching for an answer that isn't very easy.
No.
Yeah.
There's something deeper going on. There's a whole tendency among people in general to deal with different ethnicities and even people of different religions in a way that tries to shove them off or demonize them. And in the midst of that difference, rather than making effort to connect at the basic, what I call image of God level of people, and to think about that part of it, they just push them away or react hostily. And that is an immature reaction. It doesn't reflect. It really doesn't reflect the heart of Christianity, which is to reach out to people with a message that says that God loves everyone and has made provision for everyone through Jesus Christ. And in the context of Jewish people who kind of know the, if I can say, the presupposition to that story, it's really challenging. And frankly, reaching out to Jewish people is hard because people do understand that there's that part one, and in the midst of that, they're a little confused about, well, if that's part one and this is part two, then why didn't the people of part one join into part two, which has its own long story as well. But and then history blamed the Jewish people for much anti-Semitism, at least in the history of Europe and the Crusades, was a pushback because a whole entire people of multi-generations got blamed for the actions of a single generation in a single locale against a single person, and pushed back in that way. So there's a history there. It's really mixed. Even some very Orthodox people. You mentioned this boy who was Orthodox Presbyterian who engaged in this shooting. But if you go back in history to Martin Luther,
oh boy,
he was as anti-Semitic as anyone, and really planted the seeds for the anti-Semitism that surfaced in Germany. That's true. During World War II, and you can see it in his own writings. And he was captured by this. They are responsible for killing the Messiah trap, and in the midst of that, misled an entire nation over several generations.
Well, and again, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's back to the whole idea that, anybody that says, well, we Christians don't have anything to blame. Well, you certainly go back to some of the reformers. That was, not just Martin Luther, but many others that
Exactly
adopted
right.
that. So, and that's, go ahead.
Well, history has a habit of showing people demonizing others. In Christianity, the demonizing that started was the demonizing against the Jews because they killed our Jesus, and rather than turning that around in the way God did, when your backs were turned, I incarnated myself and came to you and showed that I'm love and that there's an opportunity to come out of that. We put up a hostile wall, and it's lessons like that about how we engage that we are very engaged in at the Hendricks Center.
Yes.
Because it's the reverse of the way your instincts work.
Right.
And it requires...
Counterintuitive, like you said.
Counterintuitive.
That's very true.
And it works into the way the Spirit of God makes us into people who are different than our neighbors. When we fight like our neighbors do, what we prove is we're no different than them,
right.
And we become one of many choices out there. But when we live in a way that is different and distinct, and that is not the way people expect, we raise questions.
Yeah, and it causes them to ask a question.
Exactly right. It's a kind of life that demands a question, and that's the way we need to engage.
One other issue I want to put on the table before we take a break, and that is the spiritual aspect, because I've said that if you think about it, anti-Semitism is irrational. Jews make up a very small portion of the world's population, about 18 million, maybe at most. It isn't very rational to think that that small number of people control all of the world's politics and economics. Or take another one, take the nation of Israel, about the size of New Jersey, surrounded by Arab countries more than 500 times the land area, and yet they are the source of all problems in the Middle East. There is a spiritual dimension, almost an irrationality of some of this, isn't there?
Yeah, there certainly is. And it is odd to see so much hostility aimed at such a small group of people.
Yes.
Who have been literally persecuted almost their entire existence in one way or another. I mean, it's, anti-Semitism's not new. It goes all the way back to Egypt. And, and that was a few years ago.
Yeah.
So,
or Haman. Haman wants to destroy the Jews.
Exactly right. I mean,
yeah.
just read your, what we call the Old Testament, what I like to call the Hebrew Scriptures. And, and you will see the history of the struggle of this people to have their identity, and what that represents in the midst of trying to be a people who are simply trying to live to honor God. But to say there is one God in the midst of a world that said there were many gods was a challenge. The Jewish people used to say we have one temple because we only have one God.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, the world they lived in had temples all over the place to all kinds of gods. In fact, Christians, as an extension of Judaism, were called atheists by the Romans, which blows most Christians' minds. How can a Christian be an atheist? Well, you don't believe in all the gods that we do.
Yeah.
And so, again, if you listen to the discourse of what goes on in the culture, you can pick up strands that are worth talking about, and that raise questions and can gender conversations. And so so you watch this and you go, why all this is still to this very particular, very small, the percentage, as you said, is infinitesimal compared to most of the world population, and yet they have been the objects of ridicule throughout history. And it's a tragic story in many ways, because they've also given that small percentage to our society, and the whole roots of the Judeo-Christian ethic comes out of this community because they were in touch with God. And so, there are people to be valued, not a people to be dismissed.
And just the opposite, when we had George Gilder on years and years ago, wrote a book just talking about all the tremendous advances out of Israel, the number of Jewish people that have won Nobel Prizes and have done such a great work. It's just, again, something that you need to pay attention to, and that's one of the reasons why we're talking about this. Come back from the break, though. We're talking about anti-Semitism. Maybe you can help us with how to respond and how the church should respond, because that is something as well. If we don't address that from the pulpit in our Sunday school classes, maybe we allow the culture to give the voice rather than what the Scriptures should be. So we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I suspect this is one where you just want to sit back and listen. But let me just mention before we're done here today, Darrell Bock, of course, teaches at Dallas Theological Seminary, dts.edu. And we want to talk about that, but also the Hendricks Center, which we have a link. Of course, Chosen People Ministries, but you have another organization we might want to mention as well.
Yeah, it's called Alliance for the Peace of Jerusalem. And again, Alliance for the Peace of Jerusalem, you just Google that, it'll come up.
Sure.
And go to the site. We actually have a position statement. We're actually trying to do two things simultaneously that don't normally go together, and that is, on the one hand, defend Israel's right to exist as a nation, as a people, and what the Scripture has to say about Israel, but also to be concerned about the issues of justice that deal particularly with the Palestinians and the Arabs in the region, particularly the Christians. There's an interesting, one of the challenges of that region are the way in which both Messianic believers and Palestinian and Arab believers are treated, because they get it from both sides. And so thinking through those issues is very important. It's just launched. We announced it a little over a year ago. we're in the process of gearing up. We're planning our first events for a year from September in the D.C. area, and we're slowly but surely walking out various pieces of what's involved with the organization. But its intent is to deal with the theological, social, and historical content of the region, and to make people aware of what is going on there on the one hand, and to try and be as even-handed in it as one can be. It's a challenging region, and so it's a knot for a reason, and to help people in that regard. So it's called the Alliance for the Peace of Jerusalem.
Yes, allianceforpeaceofjerusalem.com, and we'll put a link up there. Matter of fact, they're probably doing it right now as we're talking because they're so fast on it. Tom Doyle, Mark Bailey, Craig Blazing. You look at all these individuals we've interviewed over the years. Of course, Joe Rosenberg, Mitch Glazer has been on with us. Of course, you and a variety of others. So, again, you can find out a little bit more that would be that issue. And it is difficult because you have Palestinian Christians, you have Jewish individuals. Of course, you have the whole Messianic Jewish movement. You're talking about that.
Exactly.
Trying to sort all that out. I'll leave it to you guys with maybe better brain power than I have to try to figure that out. I can't figure it out.
I noticed you still have hair. I'm bald. That's the reason I burned those roots out. It's a challenging area, and it's also in some degree a different world. And so a lot of people don't get familiar with it because it's so foreign and seems so distant. But both the Alliance Group and Chosen People Ministries are dedicated to helping people understand that world a little more, and the biblical elements that are involved in that conversation, and then again exposure to enough cultural understanding to be able to have a conversation where you have some points of contact in order to engage.
And let me just mention, since we're talking about Israel, we still have that button on the right-hand side, Go to Israel with Kerby. In October, we're going to Israel and Rome this time. We've done this where we've gone to Israel and to Greece, but this time we'll do Israel and Rome. And
Rome is a fabulous place. I mean, Israel is fantastic, but Rome is also a fabulous place to visit.
So again, let me just encourage you, if you haven't signed up, we've filled one bus, but I still think there's room for you on the second bus, and so that's a possibility as well. Let's talk about what we can do. It seems to me that pastors listening to this right now, even seminary students listening to this, Bible fellowship leaders, small group leaders, to address this issue of anti-Semitism, which I've done in my own Sunday school class, is something I think we need to do, because if we don't speak to this, the culture is speaking to this.
Well, let me take it from a biblical angle, and the biblical angle is this: that really the gospel, even though we talk all the time about individual salvation, but the gospel itself, part of the good news is that God is in the business of bringing together peoples who were separated from one another together in Christ. I mean, Ephesians 2, the second half of that chapter, is all about how God brought Jews and Gentiles together into one body because Christ is our peace. And he's not talking about an individual peace between the person and God. He's talking about a peace between peoples. And so when you appreciate Israel, when you appreciate Jewish people, this is actually true of all people, but especially Jewish people, you are actually working towards the very reconciliation with the gospel that God is working towards in saving. I like to ask people this question. Now that you've got forgiveness of sins and now that you've got your ticket to heaven, why is it God has saved you?
Mm-hmm.
What was the purpose of forgiveness of sins?
What's the point?
Why did he give you the Spirit? Why did he give you the Spirit of God to indwell in you? He gave you the Spirit of God to indwell in you so that you now are capable of doing things and being the person he originally created you to be. And in the midst of doing that, he's making you into a different person. He's molding and shaping you into being like him. And so what does that look like? Well, that looks like all the relationships that I have. That's why the great commandment is what it is. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And when Jesus presented this, he presented it as one command. We've split it up, but it actually is one command. They both go together because the way in which I relate to God impacts the way I relate to other people. And this is certainly true of a group like Jewish people who, like everybody else, need the gospel, but who have a way in to have those conversations that no one else has.
That is so good. Well, again, if you want to learn a little bit more about what is at the Hendricks Center, we have a link there. We also, of course, have the Table podcast. But it does seem to me that I would be remiss if I didn't mention Dallas Theological Seminary. When Mark Bailey's in here, we oftentimes promote DTS, but there is an opportunity for some of our listeners right now that think, maybe I'd like to go either to Dallas, or the good news is you are sending professors all over the world now to actually teach classes. And, of course, there's a way you can take classes online. So talk about what's available.
Yeah, they show up in a little box.
Yes. Isn't that funny? But it is amazing. Online education, I'm running into people all over the world that say, oh, yeah, I've got a DTS degree.
I have students now in my classroom who I first met online somewhere else.
Yes.
And so, so if you're interested in kind of dipping your toe in the water and seeing what education is all about, there's this one-year certificate program that lets you get started. You can say, all right, this is like walking up to a sushi bar. Do I like sushi or not? Well, I don't know until I take the first bite, you know? So the certificate program is our sushi bar. And we ask people to see if they can do it, and they can do it from the comfort of their own living room. I like to joke with students, you looks like you have a nice shirt on, but I have no idea what you're wearing underneath. And so, you can do it in the comfort of your own home during breakfast. Sometimes the students is having coffee in a way that my students in the classroom can't. It's just not right. But anyway, there's a great way to see if theological education is a place where you want to go. Some people just do it to enhance their own biblical understanding. Other people are after a program or experimenting to see if they fit. It's all possible. What we're able to do now because of technology is actually pretty amazing. There are things that you can contemplate doing and a reach that you can contemplate having that would have been unimaginable when I first started teaching at the seminary 37 years ago.
So again, the online course is a great opportunity for you to dip your toe into the water and try that sushi bar, whatever illustration, and it's all real good. Dr. Darrell Bock, we appreciate your work. I know you're going to be traveling all over the world, so if you happen to be in that particular locale and found out that he is speaking,
South Africa in particular, or Australia, I'm also going to be in Sri Lanka this summer. So the next time you see me, I will have touched 7 countries by the time we talk.
Pretty amazing. Thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View. Let me just mention before we run out of time that tomorrow we have our Millennial Roundtable. Dr. Nick Pitts will be sitting here. Dr. Brent Taylor, we're actually going to be talking about his book, Founding Leadership, and so it's going to be a great opportunity. Later in the week, we have all sorts of other guests that we will certainly encourage you to listen to. And if you want to know a little bit more about dts.edu, that is the case. And, of course, we also talked about the Alliance. We've already posted the link on the website, so it's all available there as well. Andrew and Steve, thank you for your help behind the scenes. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. We'll see you back here tomorrow for a Millennial Roundtable right here on Point of View.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View.